All right, guys, welcome to the podcast. Back by popular demand, my highest performing guest on the podcast, and as most people know by now, one of my favorite people to hang out with and to converse with. We've had discussions on everything imaginable. Her and I agree on almost everything, and what we don't agree on, we entertain ourselves by disagreeing about it. She's always lighthearted and super bright, and that's one of the many things I love about her. And she's here. It's Dr. Brittany Stamer,
Mm-hmm.
doctor of naturopathy. She is one of the most well-informed people. And today we're going to talk about toxins and fertility because her and I are both fans of, I don't know if you'd call it a science fiction or a soon to be science fact show,
Mm-hmm.
The Handmaid's Tale, which is one amazing, incredibly well written science fiction slash historical future that we don't want to enter into. But it's one of those things that great science fiction is hard to find. And when you find it, what you see is a potential truth, an extrapolation of trends that are currently going on. And today we're going to talk about, the relationship between fertility and toxicity. And in doing some research for this, I found some, pretty scary things. And I mean, most of us would like the human race to continue. Some people don't seem to care. But most people want us to flourish and be happy and healthy and have wonderful children without birth defects and without learning disabilities. But we're seeing this stuff increase. And it's a personal topic for me, not because of infertility issues. Fortunately, that wasn't an issue for me. But I grew up 7 months from Love Canal. And most people out there know of Love Canal. I was a little kid when it started. About 1978, it was kind of a big issue. President Carter considered it, I think, a disaster area or whatever. Our governor at the time put, hundreds of thousands of dollars towards it to try to straighten it out. And if you don't know what Love Canal is basically an area near Niagara Falls. The power from the falls feeds cheap electricity through into a lot of big chemical factories that needed a lot of electricity to run the machines and make the chemicals. One of those chemical factories buried 22,000 tons of chemicals in the ground. And then they built a neighborhood on top of it years later. Now, the odd thing is what they did was not illegal. What they did was allowed at the time to take a 55-gallon steel drum and fill it up with known carcinogens and toxic waste and bury it in the ground was considered okay. You put some dirt on top. And the old saying back when I was a kid was dilution was the solution to pollution. And we're finding out that that really doesn't work. Go check the ocean for microplastics and you'll find out that's true. Check out the fish today. So we have to clean up our act. We can't just bow down to corporate nonsense and how they own our government. We have to stand up. And like I said before, Dr. Brittany Stamer is one of the people that's going to stand up. She has been standing up and representing a world that I hope I can pass the torch to people like you and your community. Like I said, we don't agree on everything. If I hung with your crew, they would love about 90% of me, and then 10% they would start looking like, okay, all right, But that's probably just a reflection of the era I grew up in. But I'm
Mm-hmm.
willing to learn. I'm willing to learn. I'm always here to listen, and I'll give
Yes.
you my wisdom, and you can give me your latest ideas. And I'm always up for it. I'm not gonna. I would never get angry at people that have the heart and soul and good intentions that you guys have. But anyway, so Brittany Stamer's here, Dr. Brittany Stamer, naturopath. Last time we met, we got into what naturopathy was versus being a
Mm-hmm.
naturopath and a doctor of natural medicine. Briefly, because one of my patients said to me that he wasn't sure that he walked away with the real deep understanding of the differences. So real briefly, go over that for me so that question is answered, and then we'll start on the first thing.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. And you're already cracking me up. And this is a really heavy topic. And so I think you add so much lightness to every single conversation. So I'm very excited to chat.
You
Um,
gotta laugh. You gotta laugh.
yeah, laugh through the tears. Um,
Mm.
so let's talk a little bit about naturopathic medicine then to start. So naturopathic doctor versus a naturopath. So like I kind of talked about last time, naturopathic doctor means that you have an undergrad degree, usually in some sort of science, or meet some sort of requirements. So you have all of those science classes. And then you go to an accredited 4-year naturopathic medical school with optional residency. And so in that schooling, you learn, all about diagnosis, physical exams, lab evaluation, all of that sort of thing. And then you also learn about all of the naturopathic care. So nutrition, environmental medicine, which we'll really be digging into today, herbal medicine, lifestyle medicine, energetic medicines, but also about pharmaceutical care and that sort of thing too. Whereas a naturopath is, you could get a degree online in a couple of weeks. So the training is just very different. They both strive to help people and to use like natural laws to help people. And that's kind of what's driving them. But they're very different in the type of knowledge and the type of education you're getting, basically. Mm-hmm. Does that describe it pretty easily?
That's great. Excellent. Yeah. Because anyone who hasn't seen the first podcast, I'm also wanting to understand where you came from. The extent of your education is so far beyond what most people understand. What your education was, of course, but I didn't know that there was anything else that sounded like what you do. Naturopathy, people mix up homeopathy with everything as well. And defining those and separating those out, I think is important.
Yeah. And I think in states like New York, where there is so each state is licensed differently. And so in a state like New York, there is no naturopathic doctor protection. And so basically anyone in the state can call themselves a naturopath. So it's really hard for the consumer to know what they're getting. Versus in a state like Oregon, only naturopathic doctors can call themselves that. And so at least people know who they're seeing when they sign up to have a visit with you.
Awesome. And that, obviously that's the way it should be countrywide. We need some, I think that needs to be changed immediately. My profession went through a very similar birthing process. And New York State, of course, was one of the ones that were dragging their feet to such an extent. It was absolutely hideous. I mean, I could not tell till I forget if it was 1991. I could not tell a person what supplement to take or anything about diet, even though I was fully educated beyond anybody else. And then the nutrition bill went through. We actually, as a profession, got together and we gave to the governor. It was Mario Cuomo, I think, at the time. And then it was, I think, Pataki who ended up signing it because he became the governor. And he couldn't believe it. He was in shock. Mario Cuomo, as well as Pataki, were shocked that that law was still hanging around, that we couldn't give advice on nutrition when we were the most versed because our education had expanded to such a degree. And he knew it was a product of heavy lobbying by drug companies in Albany, our state capital, to try to just keep us down. Because I always say, 75,000 chiropractors all decreasing the likelihood that you're going to use anti-inflammatories, muscle relaxants, and painkillers adds up to a lot of money. And so the drug companies are not happy about that. They tend not to care as much about people as they do profits. And I think that should be clear when you look at the felony convictions against Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson, the makers of our vaccine right now. I think everybody should be aware of, what is the history of these corporations that seem to, at times, people appear to believe that they care about you. So let's get started with this. One of the first things I said, was I in a tangent there?
I love hearing it. I love hearing it.
Just throwing some facts out there. Feel free to look all that up. Please do. The first time I became aware that there was toxicity in my environment, of course, was Love Canal, 1978 or so. But they were burying stuff there in the 1940s and 50s, I believe. But it started to percolate into people's basements, toxify their kids. The number of miscarriages, cancer, and birth defects in that area were through the roof. And they've been working on it, and they still claim that there's toxicity in that area. Some people have moved back in. But they've carried out mounds and mounds and built, contained cement bottomed areas for all the soil that had the 22 tons. I still can't believe it's that many chemicals in the ground. But a book came out that I read in undergrad called Silent Spring. And I think you've read it. I think we talked about it a while back. Rachel Carson. And I think she became really sort of a spokesperson for what might be going on in the environment. And until Aaron Brockovich and the movie and that awareness, I think it was Rachel as one of the main spokespersons of that. Of course, we know Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a major force in this environmental movement against Monsanto and some of the other things going on. The organs that are affected, though, talk to me a little bit about what you see, what you've read as far as which organs. Because when I researched this, of course, I was thinking liver, kidney, but it turns out it's every organ.
Mhm.
What do you see in practice and in your studies, the effect of toxicity on what part of the body?
Mhm. And yeah, I think just like what you said about Rachel Carson and Silent Spring, I think she wrote that book in the early 60s mostly around like DDT.
Yeah,
And
1962.
1962, around DDT
Mhm.
and how it was affecting the earth and how it was affecting the health of all the animals and therefore our health. And she really got ostracized for that book, but really she kind of led the way it seems in the 70s when things started to change. Like the Environmental Protection Agency was founded in 1970, and we started to address lead-based paints and gasoline and started banning some chemicals really for some of like the first times we've ever did that. So she's kind of credited with a lot of that movement. So pretty cool. And that's a great read if anyone wants to read it. But as far as the organs most affected, I think it's kind of a misconception because our liver is one of our huge detoxifiers in the body, that it takes on the majority of that burden, which is true, but really any organ system can be affected, our entire body. And because our organ systems all communicate all of the time, they're really, even if one organ system is affected from a certain chemical, its downstream effects can really affect any other organ system too. So one of the huge topics of conversation that's really been coming up lately is endocrine disrupting chemicals, or EDCs, if you've seen that talked about lately. So our endocrine system is any sort of hormonal system in the body. So that's sex hormones, that's thyroid, that's insulin, cortisol for stress response. Basically, these endocrine disrupting chemicals can alter any one of those systems, and pretty profoundly too, especially because hormones are in the body at such a low level. So they're very potent. They can be in the body in parts per trillion and have an effect. And so when we come in contact with even just small amounts of some of these chemicals, they can really wreak havoc on our hormonal systems. And so I think that's one of the most sensitive systems to these chemicals, but really it affects our immune system, making us at higher risk for cancer and allergies, our lungs, our cardiac. They can put you, certain heavy metals can put you at higher risk for having a heart attack, even with great diet and lifestyle, digestive function. So it's really endless, basically, what it can affect depending on the chemical.
Yeah, I thought that was surprising. The more I read about this, that then I knew it, but when you put it all together, the toxicity is really some will target certain areas and certain systems, but to look at how many things affect the endocrine system and then the hormones. And today's topic we talk about is fertility and the rate at which it's decreasing globally, not just in this country, but in this country especially. Looked at how many kids women had in 1950. It was an average of 5.2, and now it's 2. And then I read further that it wasn't just a choice. It was also a combination of saying, okay, smaller families, women in the workplace more intensely, financial reasons, people had less children, but it was also the inability to have them. The simple just rates of 1% a year increase in infertility over the last 20 years. And so something's going on. And when you look at systems in nature, when there's a stress on an organism, one of the things that stops happening is reproduction. And it's completely logical. If you're stressed enough, you may not have any time for that type of activity. You're too busy surviving, right? You're running around crazy trying to survive. So in that situation, any birds, it doesn't even matter. You're going to have an issue with that. So I think it's important that we see this as a warning sign that we are under incredible stress emotionally, and we're under incredible stress physically and chemically. and it's ending up as fertility issues. So, so to look for whether you are toxic or not in your body can be a little difficult because there's so many systems that can do that. But fertility is one of the measures of your health. When you think about it, as someone gets old and it is becoming less and less vital, one of the things that goes is fertility. So if you're at a young age and fertility isn't there, you may also be at such a low level of health, similar to someone that has a chronological age of 70, but you're 25. You know, the idea of cellular age versus chronological age. And I love some of the DNA tests and some of the tests that are coming out now to look at what your cellular age is, especially me, because I'm such a fuss about, you know, staying young and vital, that I'd love to have that done. Someone can tell me, you're actually 26 years old. Yes, you know, great. So I think that's a fascinating test, right? I mean, and it's a fascinating way of looking at how are we doing. But fertility is like, okay, so let's look at another question: how fertility has changed in the last 100 years. I found that in the last 40 years, the male sperm counts have gone down to half. So in 40 years, we're down to half. You wonder exponentially what that's going to be like. Even if we decrease at the same rate, will there be, you know, very few fertile people left? And you and I talked in the beginning of this about Handmaid's Tale and the fertility issues and the massive problem that created socially. You know, give us your thoughts on where this is going and how concerned you are.
So that statistic is being talked about a lot, especially by this doctor, Dr. Shanna Swan. She just wrote this amazing book called Countdown in relation to sperm counts and environmental toxins and fertility in general. It's also a great book that I've just started reading, but have been following her work. She was on Joe Rogan recently. She's been kind of all over the circuit talking. So I think her word's getting out because I feel like this topic is just newly starting to be talked about in mainstream. But by her estimates and her research, because she's like a very research heavy person, there will be 0 sperm left by 2045 if we continue trends the way they are in semen. So I really think that is a really crazy statistic. Who knows if it's really going to hit that? But yeah, she estimates that it's at least the amount and quality of sperm now that men have is the same. It's much worse than what their grandparents had. So it's about 60% less sperm than what their grandparents had in their,
That's amazing.
Huge.
Now,
huge
have you
difference.
heard anything about its relationship to testosterone?
Yeah, so her research mostly works with plastics and a little bit with pesticides. And so it's definitely related to lower testosterone, because these chemicals either lower testosterone or raise estrogen. They also can impair thyroid function, which is important for fertility. So it's on a lot of different levels, but a lot of it does have to do with testosterone and specifically a chemical called phthalates as well.
It's interesting because, you know, men of my age, we look at, you know, young men in their 20s, and we see a lot of times how they behave. And it honestly appears to us that they're more feminine than we were at that age. And yeah, obviously there's some good things about that, but there's also some strange things about that. And I to notice that and not have, at that time, in noticing that, I had no information like this available to me, you know, because we're talking like 10 years ago. And it's interesting that we're seeing the behavioral pattern and the sperm count and the testosterone all sort of going down to such a level. And like you say, the environment is such a cue on this. So it automatically, you wonder, you know, are women or men more affected by infertility? Some of the research I looked at said that women seem to have the bigger problem. Even though the male sperm count is dropping, we still have maybe enough sperm to create a pregnancy, whereas in a woman, there are other issues. So talk to me a little bit about what's going on with women versus men in fertility from what you've seen.
Yeah. And in relation to like how these toxins affect our fertility in general too, is that it really depends when we're exposed to these toxins. And when we're exposed to them, when we're having rapid cell growth, like when babies are in utero, that is a huge problem. So part of the reason that some of these men could be less fertile now is because they possibly could have been exposed to chemicals all the way back in utero as well. And so it's not just an exposure now, but it was an exposure way back then. So it's like definitely cumulative. And so it's just an interesting thing to think about. But as far as fertility with men and women, it actually is a really common misconception that most of it falls with women. Actually, a third of infertility can be attributed to men, a third to women, and then a third we don't know, is unknown, which really unknown means like that's kind of probably in the world that we work in. Like, how can we optimize, or what things can we like detoxify, or how is your nervous system, and those sorts of things. It doesn't mean we can't find out, but it's just not known in the conventional medical community. But really it's half and half in essence for men and women and infertility.
Interesting. One of the things that as a chiropractor we work on is, obviously the nervous system, which controls everything. And we have to be very careful about what we say we treat, because what we treat technically on paper is subluxation, bones out of place. And the ramifications of that are massive. Nerve pressure on the nervous system, decreasing or increasing nerve flow can cause organ systems, and not just pain. Only 10% of the nervous system feels pain. The rest of it conducts everything else that you can imagine. So we have many stories, and there's been loads of research on fertility related to chiropractic adjustments. I have had numerous women come in because they've read these articles and saw the research. Our profession's doing a pretty good job with it. And I have had men as well as women come in and say, okay, what can you do in this area? And I said, well, we know where the neurology goes, and let's work on those areas and see what happens. I don't want to make promises in that area because, as you know, it's extremely complex. But let's take one of the potential reasons, or one of the multiple reasons a couple is infertile, and get that at least taken care of. And what I find, and I think this is also reflected in the research, is that women have a much better result at the chiropractor for fertility than men do. So whatever problems men are having neurologically, they seem to have less. Maybe because there's less to worry about neurologically, I would have to guess, because I mean, the uterine, to being able to hold a pregnancy as well, you're talking about more neurology to conduct a fertile and an attached placenta over a series of months than it would be to just generate enough sperm to do it, right? So that situation, I think that might be some of the reason. But whatever the case is, I think it's interesting that there's even a mechanical reason for infertility, a nerve pressure correlation, which is such a simple and safe thing to put into the equation when you're looking at couples that are having issues. Certainly do all the medical testing, look at everything, look at the hormones, clean your diet up, all stuff we're going to talk about in a minute. But to incorporate even exercise, which we'll talk about, into the scenario along with chiropractic care and yoga, I think shouldn't be ignored, because it's so simple, inexpensive, safe, as part of the answer. Do you, in your training, has that ever come up that, because I know you can do chiropractic style adjustments in your training, does that ever come up in your training, that there's a relationship?
I've never specifically, I recommend people to go to the chiropractor and acupuncturist when going through fertility journeys or preconception, but I've never necessarily put that connection together with chiropractic and fertility. Like, I've never heard of a study, so that's really cool and interesting to me. I know of a lot of studies with acupuncture and fertility, actually. So some acupuncturists will actually come when people get IVF, will come to the IVF clinic and do needling right after an embryo transfer or something like that, which is really cool. So I totally am on board, obviously, with that. So I think that's really amazing.
Oh, it's always exciting for me when I hear that the two communities are working in concert for the benefit of the patient, because so often things get lost, and the bottom line is you still have a patient here that needs help. So you can get lost in the state regulations and rules and who's heading the case and all the egos with the doctors involved, but you still have this poor patient who's suffering in some way, shape, or form, and they're not being served properly. The communication between all the physicians and all the doctors and all the therapists and everybody involved just isn't there. And to hear that, you just made my day. I love that we're blending, natural medicine with, disease care with healthcare is probably the easiest way of saying it, right? mean, because that's the difference. You and I foster health more than we save people disease while they're, in the disease state. We do to that degree as well, but we're not. We're more about fostering health. That's it's sort of where the focus is for us. Another question I got into or wanted to get into with is EMF. The radio frequency EMF and just plain EMFs and their effect. I had heard years ago and did some research on this that a man carrying a cell phone in his front pocket for 4 hours can decrease sperm counts incredible amounts, up to 40%. And obviously, putting radio frequencies, we know the effects of something like X-ray, for example. We know that there's effects with magnetics on the body, magnetic fields. We know the magnetosphere of the Earth is important, and even the position of the moon changes the tide of the ocean. So if we can have magnetics and electromagnetic force, in other words, electricity and radio frequencies running through us, it's silly to believe that there's no effect, since these are man-made entities, man-made processes going on. To just ignore this is crazy. So the research is out there. I could find numerous articles really quickly on sperm counts and EMF. So what do you do in that area? Do you advise people on that? Does that come up in conversations?
Oh yeah, and I think the same as you, I advise people with kind of a common sense approach. It's like, this is possibly dangerous to your health, by being exposed to these frequencies all the time. And even a part of the World Health Organization has even labeled EMFs as probably carcinogenic. So yeah, we know that they can cause issue. And so there has been a lot of studies specifically on sperm count. And so the reason why is because of the possible free radical damage, basically disrupting DNA. But I do advise people on it, and it's so hard to get away from, and it can be really scary for a lot of people. So I just give very simple recommendations most of the time, which include like turning your phone off at night or on airplane mode, keep it outside of your bedroom. Don't have your phone on your lap, or your phone or your computer on your lap or in your pockets. So try to keep them off your body. And then a Wi-Fi timer is another really easy thing. Keep a Wi-Fi timer, so then at 11 p.m. it turns off. So at least when your body is like regenerating and cleaning and, getting that really good sleep that's so important for so many of our systems, then the Wi-Fi is not on. And then you can have it turn on at 7 a.m. when you get up, which is pretty easy.
That's a tremendous tip. That's a great tip. Yeah. I have a timer on my cable box. For the same reason, because the cable box is in my bedroom. And I one time when we first hooked it up, I remember laying there and hearing some kind of buzz, hum, something's going on. I think I'm thinking, well, Bill Gates is scanning my body now. Oh, so I'm like, I'm on a rant with him, the poor guy, hey, marriage is tough. But yeah, to have something like that in the room just buzzing away, it was creepy. And I thought, hey, I know, I'm just gonna put a timer on this thing, and so anything that I'm going to record on that DVR box, it's just not going to get recorded in the middle of the night, and who cares? Most of it's silly stuff anyway. Exactly. So I'd love hearing the thing just pop off, and it turns on sometime in the middle of the day, but to put it on your Wi-Fi is wow, that's a great idea. I have not done that. I just unplug it once in a while, but that's great.
Yeah. And I mean, anything electrical that's plugged in is going to emit at least some sort of EMF, actually. So whenever you're not using something, just making sure it's unplugged can also help reduce exposure. That's obviously going to be a lot less of an exposure than something that's transmitting, like Wi-Fi or something like that. But it's also just really easy, and it'll save you on your energy bill too.
I think it's one of the things that comes up, I think is funny. My father was really obsessed about the toast, and he used to, anytime we leave the house for more than like a day, he'd unplug the toaster. And the toaster was a toaster oven when they first came out. And so you'd put your toast in there, you'd push the timer, which is just on a little spring. You wouldn't know that the thing wasn't heating up. And then it would ding, and you'd pull out your cold toast and go, oh, it's Dad again, he unplugged the toaster. And that was really because he felt like the toaster was going to burn the house down, because that had happened to someone he knew, that the toaster went nuts. But think about it, your toaster is a heating coil, and that seriously could burn your house down.
Yeah.
I can. I'll have to talk to some of my fireman patients and ask them, how often the toaster just takes people out. But I mean, but unplugging stuff that's not being used would be great. Don't do that with your refrigerator, everybody.
Yes.
But everything else you can probably get away with unplugging and be fine with.
Yeah.
Let's get into some of the foods. Let's get into some
Yeah.
foods that can help. You and I probably have maybe what a lot of people would consider an obsessive diet, right? I mean, my diet is as clean as it's ever been in my life. And and you also talk about community. And one of the things that has helped me is I'm in a community of people that try to outdo each other on the cleanness of their diet. My associate doctor, Nick Major, who's been on the podcast in the past, is one of the cleanest eating people I've ever met. And he and I will eat lunch together at work. And sometimes we'll open up our bowls and just kind of go, yeah, check it out. Just garlic and chicken, and there's some broccoli, and I didn't cook any of it. It's raw, it's percolating with probiotics. It's a contest. We have fun with it. And I know you and I have talked about the green meatballs. That's one of my favorite topics to tease you about. Mm-hmm. But we can get into that another time. But some of the foods that I looked up for fertility, asparagus, broccoli, carrots had an association with higher sperm count. Eggs had choline in them, which had a lot to do with sperm count as well. Citrus, pomegranates, long time history with pomegranates, spinach, lentils, avocados. Now, I think you had something to say about avocados in the past. I don't know if you didn't like the way they were grown or what they're doing in the rainforest. Was that a conversation I had with you?
I don't know.
But should we be eating less avocados? The environment is being destroyed to make the crazy avocado toast that everybody got hip about.
I should look into that. Actually, I think there is something with avocados and maybe labor around avocados and how that might be.
It was something like a social responsibility type of thing, more than it was like that they were bad for you. Yeah. It's like taking down the rainforest or,
and then
putting
how much
children to work
travel,
or something.
Yeah, how much travel it has to come to us. But I love avocados. But I think in general, as far as foods go, I actually probably have a little bit different diet than you. I eat really very healthy, but I love a lot of food freedom. So I don't have a lot of rules around food, except for I try to eat as many whole foods as I can, because that's what makes me feel good. So I try to be, and that's what I tell my patients too. I'm like, let's be intuitive. What actually makes you feel good? Not just a high feel good, but feel good long-term. And usually people's habits change once we get that intuitive piece going in there. And so as far as what foods are good for fertility is foods with high antioxidants. So all the foods you listed, high antioxidants. So vitamin E, things like glutathione. So you want foods that are going to help with any sort of free radical exposure you have from things like EMF, from different sorts of toxins, from stress. That's what you want, because it's going to help those sensitive tissues like eggs or sperm be able to function the way they really need to. And so one of the best antioxidants is glutathione, which it's a hot buzzword. It's our master antioxidant, really. And two things that really help with that is cruciferous vegetables. So all of your broccolis and cauliflowers really helps increase glutathione, and then also eating really high quality protein too. So I tell patients to eat a rainbow of colors, lots of different fruits and vegetables, good quality protein, and then also lots of fiber, because any sort of toxin you put into your body or on your body, it basically needs to get out somehow. We need to detoxify it. And so fiber is one of those ways that helps us basically through bowel movements and drinking lots of water and being able to get it out in multiple ways like that. So it basically comes down to eating a really good whole foods diet will help you out with fertility, which I also think that's one of the reasons fertility is decreasing too. Environmental toxins, people just not wanting to have as many kids, but then also our nutritional statuses are very poor too.
Right, exactly. Yeah. You mentioned something about freedom, and that sounds interesting to me. When you say your diet is different than mine and that you have food freedom and I don't, you're probably right. But I don't know what food freedom means. I mean, talk to me about that.
I didn't mean to say that. I just meant I think diets can also be restrictive. I see a lot of women in my practice, so that's probably more why. So like weight is often a conversation, even of people who are like of normal healthy weight. And so I feel like I try to be very careful to talk around food about like what's good or bad, and more so like how does that make you feel versus how does this make you feel, and what kind of benefits does this food have versus what kind of benefits this food has. So that's kind of what I mean. And so I try to just tell people to eat whole foods that like nature has intended, and not be, upset if they eat something that's like excessively fatty, or if they indulge in something, or like like something that's really sugary once in a while. And kind of like, with how you eat most of your diet and how your relationships are and how your environmental toxin exposure is, it's like, eat the ice cream,
So like an 80-20 rule type of thing, maybe. 80% of the time, do your job. 50-50? Are you 50-50? Is that what food
No,
freedom is?
you watch how I eat,
I know.
that.
I know.
Yeah. So, and I think that comes from like, I feel like trash if I eat foods that make me, if I eat lots of sugar in a sitting, it just like makes me feel bad, and I don't want to reach for it the next time, So I think just teaching people how to be intuitive is the way to go, or how I approach it.
Yeah, one of the things that I do is muscle testing, and I've had people bring in foods and just muscle test them and see, do they feel strong or weak around a food? And I think that's one of the ways of picking into their intuition, because I think their body is actually feeling it, their mind is feeling it, and you can pick up on it. So that's something that I thought was a nice way of doing it.
Oh yeah.
What do you think some of the early signs of infertility are? Like if you look at a person and you think, boy, they might be in trouble, they better clean up their act. Are there things diagnostically or visually you see when you just have a patient come in? Let's say a patient comes in and they just say, I just feel absolutely horrible. I don't have any energy. I'm depressed. The usual, like, I have headaches and blah, blah, blah. You look at them. Do you see people and you think, well, this person is teetering on probably infertility as well? Look at X, Y, and Z that you see. What are some of the things you look for infertility, like a sign versus a symptom even?
And I think how you described it before is like when our bodies are under stress or when our bodies are unhealthy, kind of the first thing to go is fertility, because that's not necessary to continue living right now. That's necessary to continue living tomorrow, but our health is so poor right now. Like, where are we going to put our energy demands? Probably into our heart or into our lungs, or, places like that. And so I think decreased health in general can often mean infertility. That's not always true. But I see a lot of female patients. So when I see people with abnormal menstrual cycles, either too short of cycles, too long, spotting, painful menses, and cramping and heavy bleeding, those are signs that possibly there could be some sort of underlying pathology that could lead to fertility. Reduced libido too is a huge one. Usually that can mean like not enough testosterone or imbalance in other hormones. And really any sort of like decreased health state could lead to that. And that doesn't mean that everyone that has any sort of, headache is going to be infertile, but because we always have to look deeper. But I think if your health is overall decreased, then it's something that could be happening, basically.
Yeah. Other things I've seen is, extreme acne. A lot of times a sign that hormones are off. Hair loss or hair growth, signs in women and in men that there might be something wrong. I'd found that in my hair loss, you look at it genetically, and it was a sign of higher testosterone than lower testosterone, which is kind of interesting. You think of hair loss, you think of age, and with age, you think of, maybe being more decrepit. But you look at a lot of guys that have lost their hair young, they're extremely muscular and kind of aggressive. And you think, well, gee, they seem pretty healthy to me, But that's so even if you lose hair or gain hair, either one could be a sign of being unhealthy or healthy. And I think I thought that was kind of fascinating. But like you say, sex drive is great. And also painful sex was another one that I found when I was researching this. And that would obviously be some kind of incongruent sexual response. Sexual drive in your response isn't there. So you're in a sexual act without the proper alignment of all the things that need to align. Just like a good birth has its sequential order, and a medical intervention into a natural childbirth kind of throws things askew, and then it becomes a medical birth no matter what, because you've taken the natural steps and disrupted them in some way, let's say. So I think that's a big one. Now, other topic I thought was interesting, and it's something I'm like obsessed with, is exercise. And when I researched this, obviously being obese and sedentary has to be associated with poor health, because just about everything points us that way. And this is also the case. People in that category tend to be that, because if you're obese, you're probably either having a hormonal disorder, something with growth hormone or testosterone or estrogen imbalances. Polycystic ovarian disease is associated with obesity. So you're going to have, how many cystic ovaries. So your egg production is going to be off. And I thought it was interesting that when people were extremely physically active, they also lose their fertility. And you think of, when a woman is suffering with anorexia, her body weight can go down so low that she loses her menstrual cycle. So you really can't be pregnant easily without a menstrual cycle. I'm sure it happens, but it's less likely to happen because the entire chemistry of the uterus and the neurology and physiology of the uterus is being thrown off. So either extreme, someone is, obese, morbidly obese, or, extremely thin due to anorexia, let's say, or some other disorder that doesn't allow them to hold a certain amount of body weight. Because you see the images of fertility throughout time is usually a relatively well put together woman, right? I mean, someone that has a little body fat on them and has that shape to them, fertility. And I think to this date, that's still somewhat true, that there is a certain body that is significant of fertility. But it doesn't hold true for everybody's physique. Every man and every woman can have very different shapes and sizes and be within that realm. But if you're within the genome within your genome as far as body mass, you're more likely to be healthy. So I think that one of the things I saw was that exercise that was extreme or exercise that was way too mild. If you're just doing a little gardening and you're calling that exercise, you go for like a quarter-mile walk. Well, that's a nice start if you're starting from a place of a lot of inactivity and orthopedic issues and such, but that isn't enough. But marathon running is probably the opposite from what I read. Intense exercise creates stress, and stress and infertility are related. You don't want to create all kinds of cortisol and adrenaline all the time and expect your body to say, oh, this is a great environment to have a baby in. So the body will shut down, just like other stressors in the environment we talked about earlier. So I found that the significant but somewhat moderate exercise seemed to fall into the category from all the research I did. Too little wasn't right, and the extreme stuff wasn't going to get you anywhere. So what do you think about that as far as exercise goes? What's your advice on someone who's dealing with fertility and physical activity?
Oh, yeah. So first of all, to talk about obesity and related to environmental toxins, because I know we touched on that. So like diet and lifestyle can play obviously a huge role. But there's actually environmental toxins that are called obesogens because they can literally trigger obesity to occur or contribute to it really greatly. And same thing with diabetes. A lot of these environmental toxins can actually cause diabetes or contribute to diabetes. So I think that's really interesting. But exercise on its own is also an amazing thing to support fertility. So just like you said, over exercise or under exercise are both issues, and kind of the sweet spot in research for exercise for fertility is about 2 to 4 hours of moderate to high exercise per week is the sweet spot. So it actually can be kind of low, and then as much gentle exercise as you want. So, do a hard run of, for 3 hours a week or weightlifting or something like that. And then walk your dog every day for 20 minutes. That could be like a really great fertility plan for people. So when I talk with patients, sometimes I'm talking about like, how do we get more fat in your diet and get you up to a higher fat content in your body? Sometimes we're talking about lowering weight. It really just depends on the person. And people can even fall within that range and still not have optimal fertility too, because there's so many factors. But really exercising at least like 2 to 4 hours a week at a moderate to high level is what's been shown to be best. So, and exercise is also an amazing way to detoxify. So also like good on that level too. So very important.
Yeah, I think what I saw was yoga, walking, mild running, things that weren't extreme, but at the same time were stimulating. And I think from all this toxicity talk, we need to do another podcast maybe on detoxification specifically.
Yeah, I was thinking that too, because I always, with patients with detoxification and fertility, you really don't want to detoxify really heavily while trying to get pregnant. It is a very bad idea, and without like medical care too, because a lot of these toxins are fat soluble. So if you have extra weight and you're trying to detoxify them, you can feel miserable when you're trying to lose weight, even without like a caloric restriction and drinking lots of water. Like those toxins need somewhere to go and to be processed. So you need to have those like emunctories, like your bowels and your sweat and all of those things going. And so detoxification should be done before you decide to try to get pregnant a lot of the time. So
absolutely. That's what we did. Brigette and I, we had a super clean life the year before we decided to have kids, because we knew that detoxifying while trying to get pregnant, if you think about it, you're trying to get something out of you while you're trying to put something in you, right? I mean, you're trying to have a baby, you're trying to implant a baby into you, but your body's going, let's get rid of everything,
Yes.
That does seem counterproductive, to say the least. So last thing, let's get into 3 tips that we can do to improve fertility. But before you answer that, I just want to tell everybody, if you're liking these podcasts, please, share them, give them a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. We're going to have more of Dr. Brittany Stamer on in the future, if I can talk her into it. And because she's always a bright light for all of us to listen to. But give us the 3 tips that you think that would be a big part of improving fertility in the world.
So we haven't touched a lot on like the different types of toxins that we're talking about. So that's kind of what I wanted to go in here. Like, what are kind of like the maybe 3 big things? So the first one would be buy organic. So I know pesticides is just a very big term that gets used, but there's many different types of pesticides used. I think one of the major ones that gets talked about is Roundup or glyphosate, but other chemicals like 2,4-D has been linked to decreasing sperm. Things like atrazine have been linked to decreasing sperm and fertility as well. And so buying organic as much as possible is going to really help improve your fertility rates. And at the very least, looking on the Environmental Working Group, which is this awesome group that basically does tons of research on toxins, on water quality, on soil health. They will give you a list of foods that are okay to buy conventional and ones that are better to buy organic in order to mitigate your risk to toxin exposure. It's called the Clean 15 and Dirty Dozen. So that would be one of the biggest things. And even beyond that, getting a sustainable box from a local farmer, because organic chemicals can even be used on your organic fruits and veggies. So knowing your farmer and what kind of chemicals they're using is even better. And it supports your community, which is great. So that would be
let me interrupt you there. Let me interrupt you there for a second. You said sustainable box?
Yeah. So it's called a CSA. And it's basically, I think you have one, right?
Yeah.
From your local farmer.
Talk to people about it though. Yes.
Yeah. So a CSA stands for like community supported agriculture. And so what it really is you basically buy in to a local farmer for 16 weeks, let's say, for most of the summer, spring, summer, fall. And you give them a certain amount of money. And in exchange, you get a box every week of fresh produce and whatever is fresh for that week. So it's not going to be the same, but that's even better. That's kind of the second part of this is we want to diversify our diet too, with lots of different fruits and veggies. And so It helps on so many levels. You get to buy into your community, support someone local. You can know if they're using any organic pesticides or if they don't, if they're like beyond organic in that way. And then you also get to diversify your diet, which actually helps diversify your microbiome, but also certain foods and certain plants uptake different sorts of heavy metals or synthetic chemicals into their structure. And so diversifying that can really help with mitigating your exposure as well.
Yeah, those programs are fantastic. I've been doing it for years. And I think the other thing I like about it is it has you eating in season, because this stuff isn't preserved, it isn't refrigerated, it comes out of the ground. You go and get it, or it's delivered at one of them. Everyone brought it to one person per month went to the farm, loaded their car with everybody in the neighborhood who was a part of it to their porch. And the person stapled names on all the stuff. So we go to someone's porch, you would get notified, and you go and pick up your stuff. And you picked it up just, sitting on the guy's front porch. You may or may not even know who the person is, but they're in the same group as you in your neighborhood. And it was covered in dirt. And you're like, oh my God, I haven't seen a beet or a potato that dirty in my life. And you loved it because, I knew about soil organisms even back then, because I love the microbiome and all this. And, you didn't even want to clean the thing. And I know that sounds crazy to some people, but you almost wanted to eat the dirt and the potato, the whole thing. But it was just, to have something that natural, that clean, that fresh in season is like a massive health. So I'm sorry, continue. I just wanted to add that in.
Oh yeah, I love that. I've been getting a CSA here, and then I do a meat share from a local farmer too, or buy every so often too. So you can do it with different, with dairy or meat or whatever, which is great. And so that'd be one of the things, because there's a lot of link between pesticides and fertility and other health issues. The second is avoid artificial fragrance. So artificial fragrance commonly, almost the majority of the time, has that chemical called phthalates that I talked about. Phthalates can also be found in your shower curtains, in takeout containers, in any sort of a lot of different plastics you probably have in your home that you have your hand soap in or shampoo in, those phthalates, because what phthalates are is it's a plasticizer. So it helps make plastics more flexible. But they're also found in artificial fragrance in high amounts. And so getting rid of all artificial fragrance in your house can be very helpful. Phthalates can be found basically those fragrances in hand soap, even seemingly good, quote unquote, good hand soap. I've had to break it to quite a few patients that their eco-friendly or their green brand actually has artificial fragrance. So you have to look for fragrance or perfume and not just buy into when they say natural or eco-friendly or healthy or non-toxic, because those words mean nothing. There's no regulation around that. And so making sure you read a label is really important. It's in makeup, it's in detergent, even good detergents or eco-friendly detergents, in lotions that are eco-friendly. And so, and even in some essential oils that aren't a good brand. And so I say opt out of artificial fragrance and use really good, clean essential oils, really true, pure essential oils as an alternative. Because as we talked about, phthalates are linked with lower sperm counts. They're also linked with endometriosis for women, PCOS for women, and a whole host of other fertility issues.
Yeah, I mean, I opened up a shower curtain years ago. It was all, tightly packaged. I started unfolding it to sort of stretch it out so I could put it on little clips. And I got a face full of plastic smell that nauseated me. I took it outside, threw it over my car in the garage, and I let it air out. I have an attached garage. I opened my door to go to work in the morning, and the whole garage smelled like it's a really disturbing smell, as people probably know what I'm talking about. You knew it couldn't be healthy. So I then popped the garage door open, and I took it and I threw it over a bunch of rocks in my yard and let it bake in the sun for a few days. And then it stopped stinking, which means the outgassing has lessened. But it outgasses, for, I don't know, probably 20 years for all I know. But, until the thing turns back to microplastics or whatever it turns into in the future. So I think that's a good thing so people are aware. My answer, if you have to be buying new plastic products, which I think you should avoid, is to throw it outside and let it bake. So at least not, you know, affecting your health and concentrating in your house, because indoor air is 5 times more polluted than outdoor air. So you can imagine you're breathing in the outgassing of all the products you have in your house, and a newer house is a lot worse. And there's a great book called How to Grow Fresh Air, put together by NASA research on which plants you should have in your house and how they regenerate and take up toluene and the different chemicals, formaldehyde that come out of all your products. Great book, heavily researched, because they were trying to keep potentially keep astronauts alive in space and regenerate as much oxygen as possible. And you can imagine the space capsule is probably filled with nothing but plastics outgassing, and something that, you know, they wanted to help clean the air up for these astronauts to breathe while they're up in space for however long. So. All right. So how many tips is that? I lost count. Is that 2?
It's 2. I think 2.
Okay.
Do you want my
What
third?
do you got for number 3? Tell me number 3, please.
Okay. Like you already kind of alluded to, is avoiding most plastics if possible. So not all plastics are created equal in the way that they're not all as toxic and don't all have the same leaching effects. And so to be completely fearful of everything, I try to make sure patients aren't. You know, those little, you know, triangles at the bottom of plastics that have the numbers in them, 1 through 7. So the best plastics are 5, 4, and 2. And so the rest of them tend to have known leaching effects and or are toxic to people. And so if you, you know, if you can avoid most plastics in your life, I tell people to do that, but it's really impossible in our modern day life. I had a mentor once say, I challenge you to, you know, live a day without plastic. And it's almost impossible, because even I try very hard to do that. A garden hose is plastic, you know, so even if you're growing your own food, it's just, it's so ubiquitous around us. So I say, avoid as much as you can. And that's going to be what's best, really. Just control what you can and forget about the rest, and try not to stress out mostly, because our bodies are really resilient. So I try to remind people that your body's resilient. You're going to do all these good things about it, and stress is negatively affecting people too. So really just doing what you can and doing it in baby steps, getting resources or someone else to do it with you is going to be the best. So,
yeah. No, that's fantastic. And I think that those are all great tips. So it's 5, 4, and 3 are the numbers of the plastics that are 5, 4, 2, 5, 4, 2. All right. Yeah. So you can look at the bottom of your plastic bottle. I noticed you're drinking out of a glass jar when you took a sip there. Good job. We were one of the first people to get our conversations about microplastics in the ocean, and you going plastic, reusable plastic. I think it was what is the term for plastic that you use once?
Single-use plastic.
Thank you. Simple as that. Single-use plastic. You went single-use plastic free for an extensive amount of time, and you encouraged me to do the same thing. And I did a decent job. I wasn't able to completely do it, and I've continued to do that as much as I can, and I think everybody should make a little effort, especially if you know what's going on in the oceans with the microplastics and all that. And plastic's artificial, it doesn't biodegrade properly, and we should all make an effort to keep this earth as clean as possible. All right, so that completes our questions. I, once again, am thrilled to have you there. You gave us loads of stuff to go with. You're a vast fountain of knowledge, and I appreciate you coming on today. I know that people can contact you and to do consultations, because I had a patient of mine do that with you, and she was, thrilled. So how would they do that if someone wanted to say, hey, I got health problems, I want to talk to this Dr. Brittany Stamer? How would they get a hold of you?
So my website is the easiest way. So it's drbrittstamer.com. So DR and then brittstamer.com. And that's really the easiest way. You can get my contact information, fill out a form, chat with me. I'm also actually, this is perfect timing that we talked about this. I'm actually helping co-teach, I guess, this fertility workshop next Saturday on May 15th. So they can always, look on my website if they're interested in that too.
It's fantastic. Send me a flyer for that. I'd like to keep that up at the office.
Okay. Sounds good. Yeah.
All right.
I'd love to.
All right, Doc. Thanks again. Thanks again for doing this with us. And I think maybe we'll do another one on toxicity and detoxification. because that's a topic that I love. I've done a fair amount of it, and I advise people on it, all the time in practice. So, all right, you have a great day.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
We'll
It's
talk
always
soon,
great.
Brittany. Thank you. My pleasure.